This video is going to show you how to cover your cube in tissue paper. I've cut a strip out of my big sheet of tissue paper that is just a little bit wider than the size of my cube. And I just want to talk you through some logic in terms of applying tissue paper to your forms. The cube is a pretty easy one because we're dealing with flat planes. When we look at the sphere in another video, you'll see how it's different in the approach. So with the cube, you can apply several planes of tissue paper to the cube at once without having to cut out 6 squares. So hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, in that if I start to glue the tissue paper on at one end, I can then just kind of somersault it and add more tissue paper as I go along. So, in order to begin the process, we are going to make sure, number one, that you're satisfied with the shape that you have. Any last tweaking you want to do to straighten out lines, recurve lines, this is your last opportunity to perfect things. And then once you're sure about your form, you're going to take your white glue, squeeze a little bit out onto a surface that's appropriate. You can use a brush, you can use a Q-tip or something. I just use my finger. And I'm going to dot the glue along the wire frame. So all 4 sides are done, and I'm going to lay this on top, and I want to make sure that my edges are parallel so that the somersaulting of the paper doesn't get things too far off track. And I'm hoping that through the camera lens you can kind of see that you can see the little dots of glue through the tissue paper. And I'm just smoothing the tissue paper down to the frame. I'm going to let that dry. So you can kind of multitask, get all your wire forms done, and then start covering them with the tissue paper, and while one aspect of your form is drying, then you can pick up another. So here I have this cube, not a cube, a sphere that I made last semester, and I demonstrated for my class how to cover the panel. And so you can hopefully understand that if you want a neat application of tissue paper to your form, especially something like a sphere, you're not going to just do this sort of a thing. You're not wrapping a wine bottle, okay? In order to get a very smooth surface, you're going to have to break it up into parts. So if you can imagine when you cut up an orange into, let's say, 6 pieces or something, and you take a bite out of that orange, and then you lay the skin flat, that you might get a shape that's kind of like an eye or a football. It's probably not dark enough for you to see, so let me do it in pen. A pen that works, preferably. Oh, come on. something like this, right? So let's just cut that shape out and see if it might fit over one of my pieces. If not, this is the way to kind of guesstimate how big of a eyeball or almond or football you need. So I would kind of mark a spot on your tissue paper and land, you know, the South Pole versus the North Pole. Land that South Pole down there, but give yourself a little bit of room. And just kind of roll the sphere forward and every so often mark the paper. And you want it to be a generous fit, right? So this is not, in the beginning, it's not a perfectly tailored suit. We want that margin of error so that we can make adjustments. And now I'm going to cut out my almonds, my footballs. And I don't want to see any of your outlines, so I know you need them to make the pattern, but when you start to lay the tissue paper down, try to make sure that we don't see any pen marks. If you need to recut the shape out of the tissue paper, so be it. Okay, so that might actually show up. So then what you could do is just kind of lay this on top of a clean area, and you now have a stencil. All right. When you do the sphere, you know, you can start off, you can do every other panel. I am going to lay this one side by side because cutting off the excess next to a panel that already has tissue paper on it can be kind of challenging. So that will be my demonstration. So once again, taking the glue, and I'm dabbing it on all of the wire that I want to connect to. And then I'm going to start to lay the tissue paper down. The spherical forms are a bit more challenging because we're not dealing with a flat plane anymore. So I like to keep a thumb on one end as I start to lay it down. And notice that I'm kind of tugging on the tissue paper every once in a while so that I get good adherence. So the trick with these curved surfaces is that planar surfaces, like paper, they don't want to bend in two ways. They're easy to bend in one direction, but to bend over a complex curve without buckling is challenging. It's impossible, right? It's why they put darts in fabric when you're making sleeves around a shirt. So like here, it's buckling a little bit. I want to show you how you can relieve that pressure if you just kind of cut little darts into the edge. Okay. I'm just smoothing against the form. And now I'm going to show you how to trim it away. Normally, I would wait until the glue is totally dry, but I think you can get the gist of what I do even with it wet. Try not to mess it up too badly. So this is where your X-Acto knife comes in very handy. And I'm going to hold the tissue paper with one hand, my non-dominant hand. And then I'm using the X-Acto knife, and because the glue is wet, it doesn't want to cut through so easily. If it is wet though, you can also try another trick, and that is just simply to kind of pull the tissue paper away. In fact, that might be the easier thing to do at this point. So because the tissue paper is so thin, if it gets wet, it can tear easily. And now we're just using its propensity to tear to our advantage. It actually worked pretty nicely. So if your glue is wet, you might decide to try this technique. It's a little challenging over here, but this is where we can come back in. And use the X-Acto knife. So let's say that that stiff paper was on this side rather than plunging the X-Acto knife straight down like that to trim away the excess. You'd want to hold it at an angle so that you don't bust through this panel. It takes a little bit more care and attention, but you can do it. Also be careful not to bust through your skin. Whoa. Don't roll away on me. Okay, there you have it. Side 2 of, or panel number 2 of the sphere done. So then I would just continue on. Your eyes are not deceiving you. This paper is a little bit more yellow than the panel I just did. It's a yellow tracing paper that I have. So set that off to the side. I'll show you the next step with the cube, although it might be fairly self-explanatory. It does slice pretty easily when the glue is dry. Okay, so then we're moving on to this panel, and as you might imagine, it's the same process. Add the glue. And I would say be generous with the glue, but not sloppy. If you get too much glue on there, it can make cutting it away with the X-Acto knife a little bit challenging. So you want good coverage, but you don't want glue like dripping off the surface. And then this tissue paper that I have obviously is not pristine. It's very wrinkly. So I assume that you'll have an easier time if you got brand new tissue paper and it's fresh out of the package. So that's side number 2. And then you would just repeat all the way around. Obviously you would trim away these edges before putting on the last 2 panels. And then you're all set.